to begin by talking about La Duchesse de Langeais and the fact that you photographed tests of Garbo.
You see, Charles, I was. Garbo had her own cameraman at. She worked mostly at MGM. It was William Daniels. Somehow or another, I was contacted by Walter Wanger and someone else that's with him, associate producer, Dr. Eugene Franke, yes. Eugene Franke was associated with Walter Wanger, and they were preparing to film a story, The Duchess of L'Anglaise.
Yes.
Garbo.
Yes.
And James Mason.
Yes.
They wanted me to shoot the test. Either Daniel was busy or he was not available. So they called me and said to report over the Charlie Chaplin studios on La Brea at a certain time, and I was over there. I went over. And I met Tatherow.
Raleigh
Tatherow. He was Mr. Chaplin's early day cameraman, and when Mr. Chaplin left for England, he put Lorre in charge, managing. And a wonderful chap. We walked down to the stage, and he didn't seem to know much about it. He said, yes, Miss Garbo's coming over to do a test. And I said, well, we're going to shoot it. And he said, well, you pick a place here, this stage. And when she comes, he says, I don't have a big idea at all. I mean, it's a very big idea of what she's going to do. So we waited, the electricians and the crew, and we waited and expecting to see Miss Garbo with her entourage, you know. I thought she would have. But after waiting, an hour or so, here she comes, all by herself. I remember it had a big black hat on, straw looks like, and a pair of slacks and a white blouse. She was very gay as she walked in. She said, hello, hello, hello. Where's the dressing room? And we were all more or less kind of standing there waiting to see whether her agent, her manager, the hairdresser, and the makeup woman, you know, but no one. Raleigh said, well, I can take you over. I says, your hairdresser, where's your, and makeup? She said, oh no, I'm going to make my own makeup, fix my own hair, and I don't need any costume. You're just going to make close-ups, aren't you, Jimmy? And I said, yes. So they took her over to an old dressing room, and Chaplin Studios, they hadn't anyone work there for, many years. And I can imagine that the dressing room was just filthy with dirt that hadn't been cleaned, you know. So, in about, 3/4 of an hour, here comes Miss Garbo. She had fixed her hair, she had put on her makeup. And she didn't really put on very heavy, it's light, if I remember. So she came down, she says, Jimmy, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, let me see. There was a column, I remember, one of these portable columns, and I asked one of the men there to help me move the column over, and I put a round table, and it looked like a kind of outdoor patio or outdoor cafe it could be. Because usually you have a table and someone sits down there, and it's a kind of, there don't seem to be, photographically speaking, They don't seem to be comfortable or relaxed. And I thought that if she sat on this table and leaned on the column, you see, that it would more or less relax her, and that I could photograph, compose a little better. And I always like to photograph people leaning on a wall or something, you know. So she did, and then she said, "Can I smoke a cigarette?" I said, "Sure, that's fine." So she got asked someone if she had a cigarette, because I don't think she smokes. Then I was very nervous, Charles. You know, Miss Garbo, who I've never seen very much, only when I worked at MGM, and her sets were always encased with the screens that we have, you know. And no one were allowed on her sets excepting people working in her unit. Only time I'd see her was when she'd walk by, going to lunch or coming back. So now here I'm to shoot her tests. I didn't know how to light her, so I just started in with general lighting, and it just didn't work. It looked awful, and I knew I was in the spot. Until I said, well, I have to get the cameras going, start the motors, and regardless how it's going to look, if it's not good, we can always trim this part off, you see. We could have it cut off. But the minute the cameras start rolling, she took on, wonderful feeling, you know, she expressed wonderful emotional feeling of some kind of that cigarette, and it excited me. You know, you can see this creature come alive, you know. And then I began to get a certain inspiration of lighting, changing the light. I could see what this individual required. And so I just said, all right, this is good now. I'm going to kill all the lights. And I started with just one little spotlight. And I lit that and moved it around and just do it. And now the sculptured face of hers, you know, it's just wonderful. Mm-hmm. It just seemed to reflect the light and capture the light. The light runs just like water. It follows lines, you see. Mm-hmm. And she just looked up with a cigarette and the smoke curling up, and I had this one light. And I put a little light in the back just for her hair. Didn't need very much, because her hair was light in a way. Not a real light blonde, but rather medium. And then I put one little fill light just for her eyes, to catch the light in her eyes, you see. And then I sketched the background. Usually I always sketch the background first in lighting, because I know what the scene is, and because we have a script, you see. Then I can sketch in the background to create the atmosphere. But with her this time, I had to get the atmosphere from her, you see. So I lit her first, which was not the thing I always, the way I work. Yeah. And I made several styles of lighting. But there was only one or two that I thought was good. The whole week took about 1,000 feet of film. I remember it was one magazine full. Took us about, 3/4 an hour. And she said, fine. And she said, well, don't you think we have enough? Sufficient now? I said yes. I was willing to stop then, because I couldn't go any further. How far can you go? You know, just photographing a person leaning on a column. So I was very glad that she said yes. But she said, then I go home. I think I go home.
She didn't dress, she didn't wear period dress?
No, she just had this white blouse, no period dress. And I thought, it's strange that, gee, what happened to Garbo? Usually she has her maid, hairdresser, makeup, costume woman, and here she comes in all by herself.
It was a period picture too.
It was a period picture.
Did you do any more work on the picture?
No, the picture was canceled.
I know.
And I was called to James Mason's home one evening. He said he wanted to talk to me. I had first met James Mason. Well, as I was saying, Charles, I first met James Mason in London in '36 when I made Fire Over England.
Mm-hmm.
I think he wasn't well known. He was just a bit player or an extra, really. A bit player, I think he was. He wasn't an extra. And some reporter from some newspaper, I don't remember recall the name now, Hudson or something like that, asked me about my how I felt working in England. And then he said, do you see anyone around here that are not big stars like Olivier that might develop into a star, some talent? And I said, yes, there's a man sitting over there reading paper. Now, I think he photographed well, and from what I've seen him act in this so far, he hadn't got a big part. He's just a bit player. I think he has I see quite a good future for him. And he wrote it up. Now, time goes on, and Jimmy Mason developed into quite a well-known player. And here I was going to do a film with him. And he called me over to the house, and we talked about it. And he showed me this clipping, you see. He said, Jimmy, he said, I owe a lot to you because that gave me a lot of encouragement. And you were the only one that was really kind to me. He said, no one over there ever thought I would ever have a chance. So he said, I was happy that we're going to do a film, but I think it's fallen through. It's sad. He says, I want to do the film very much. And I was surprised. He said that Miss Garbo wanted to play this part because it's really, the part is the male lead is the biggest part. And I was surprised that she wanted to do it. But there's some financial disagreement or something. I forgot whether. I remember he said that Howard Hughes was to guarantee him to be paid, but he wanted to be paid. Jimmy said, I think, to be paid in American money rather than in British pounds or Italian liras. I've forgotten now what it was, Charles. But the fact that certain financing things couldn't be worked out, and the picture was cancelled.
Max Ophuls was mentioned as the possible director for it, I remember.
Yes. But I was disappointed, very disappointed, because I was looking forward, to photograph Miss Garbo because I think she's one of the most interesting persons. She had her own beauty, because beauty, you can't put your finger really on it, because everyone has a different sense, idea of beauty. They look at beauty in many ways.
Yes.
But I thought she was the most interesting, and to me, a beautiful woman.
Moving to another subject, Humphrey Bogart you filmed in Passage to Marseille.
Yes.
And I wonder what your memories were of working with him.
Well, I enjoyed working with Humphrey. I liked him as a person very much. Besides working with him, we used to go to the steam baths, or Finlandia they call it, down in the Bing Crosby building. He and Peter Lorre would be down there, and they were quite a pair, you see. They were great friends, and we used to have a lot of fun down there. He'd come down there to, after hangover, and steam out. Then they get together and go right across the street to a place called Villanova, the bar, and then start all over again. I couldn't keep up with him, really. But working with Humphrey was no trouble to a cameraman. He didn't have what you say, good side or favorite side. He didn't care. He just went in there and, played his scenes the way he played it. And I noticed that the directors never had to give him too many directions. They would go into a corner and consult with each other sometime, and until Humphrey got his point or over, or see what the director really wanted. But invariably, I think Bogey just played the scenes the way he felt it, because that's the only way he could play it. You know, how can you tell a director like, actor like Humphrey to act the scene? It's just ridiculous. You just had to say, "Oh, Humphrey," he said to the camera man, "just tell Humphrey where the sidelines are," and we put a little chalk mark down and says, "Well, don't go any past here because you'll be out of the light," or you know. And so he would, in that area, he would play his scene.
His own personality carried him through.
Yeah. But the funny story, because he only lived up here above me, about a block away.
I know. On King's Road.
No, he lived up here on, I don't know the street number, as a matter of fact. Peter Lorre lived on King's Road.
Ah.
You see? I'm living on Queens.
And Humphrey on Queens.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to work one morning. Did I ever tell you this story?
No.
I was going to work around 7:30, and I went down Queens Road, down the hill, and I heard a voice. "Jimmy, Jimmy." And it sounded to me like Humphrey Bogart. And I wonder why he's up so early. And I stopped the car, and I looked back, and I see a man with two kids on each side of him, holding hands there, in a vacant lot. And I backed up, and I began to recognize it was Humphrey Bogart. And in my mind, I said, I didn't know he had two children. Geez, out walking with them. Well, Charles, I was sorry that we got interrupted there at this moment. We were talking about Humphrey Bogart with his two kids. I was going to work. Well, when I backed my car up, I see Humphrey Bogart, and he says, "Jimmy," he says, "you going to work?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Am I in the first shot?" I said, "Yes, you are." He says, "Well, you're supposed to be there at 9 o'clock. We're supposed to shoot." He says, "Can you see you can delay it a little bit? So I'm waiting for Peter Lorre to come pick me up, you know." And he says, "I want you to meet my friends." I said, "Well, I know them. They're the Thompson boys." So he said, "Well, I'm going to meet Peter Lorre here, and I think I'll make it. But I don't think I'll get there till at least 9:30 or so. So whatever you can do," he says, "I'll be very happy if you do it." I said, "Well, I certainly will, Humphrey, but you better get there as soon as you can, because I know that I won't need a great deal of time to get the shot. And you know how the production manager are, they're watching me every moment. So I went to the studio and got everything ready, and he was there around 9:30, and because he didn't need makeup, because he was playing this Passage to Marseille. I think it was prison, about the French prison, Devil Island. And he escaped, and he and Peter Lorre, and he had a growth of beard, and dirty dungarees, and he looked just perfect that morning. But as far as I was concerned, he didn't need any makeup, and I don't think Bogart ever did use makeup, unless when he played scenes, pictures like with Bergman. They have to clean up a little bit, but in this one he didn't. So what happened was he came to work, and around lunch hour, I turned around and looked, after lunch rather, went back to work. I was lining up, and I looked around, and here I see the whole Thompson family there, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, and 2 kids. So Bogey evidently invited them over to watch how they make movies, took them to lunch. Well, it happened to be after the day previous, Charles, Bogey and Peter Lorre went home together up to Peter's house. And Bogey's wife, not Lauren Bacall, that's
Mayor Method?
Yeah, Mayor Method, was to come there and meet him, and then they would go home or go to dinner. Well, I guess that Peter and Bogey got to drinking, got to talking, and forgot the time passed, and finally Mrs. Bogart arrived, and then the 3 of them got into discussions, and I don't know what happened, but from what I gather, Mrs. Bogart got mad, and she just left and took off her jewelry, rings and wristwatch or whatever, bracelets, and got mad and threw them at Bogey because they used to, get into terrible arguments and fights, and they would throw things at each other. So Bogey took the jewelry and picked them up, and she left him, and he wrapped it up in his dirty handkerchief, part of the costume. And he stayed overnight there at Peter Lorre's. So next morning he got up, and I guess he had a hangover, and he's walking home up the hill. He came down Kings Road and coming up Queens Road. And right on that corner there, Queens, the Thompson family had just moved in not many years, 3-4 years, and Mrs. Thompson was preparing breakfast. Made coffee, and Bogey smelled this coffee. And he went to the back door there, and he knocked. Miss Thompson came to the door, and Bogey says, "Oh, ma'am, your coffee smells so good. Can I come in and have a cup of coffee?" He said, "I'm Humphrey Bogart." Well, she just probably, yes, because she's a very charming woman, She said, come in, yes. And he sat on the kitchen table there, and she poured him a cup of coffee, and it must have really tasted wonderful, He said, "Oh, this is wonderful." And so he started telling Mrs. Thompson what had happened. You see? I told you that he and Mrs. Bogart had an argument, and he was up to Peter Lorre's house, and so she left him, and he's now walking home, and he doesn't feel too good, and he wanted a cup of coffee. And so he smelt this coffee and asked her, to let him in. I'm not telling the story too well, but so he says, "Now, could I have another cup?" See? And by that time, he'd shown her. He said, "Now, look, here's the jewelry my wife threw at me," and spread it out on the table. And she'd become a little concerned. So she poured him another cup of coffee, and she went over and says to her husband, says, Frank, you better come. There's a man here sitting. He's unshaven, and he's Humphrey Bogart, and he just wanted some coffee, and I gave him the second cup, and he said that he and his wife had an argument, and she threw the jewelry, and he showed me this jewelry and this dirty handkerchief. You better come and see. So he came, and they introduced each other, but he's a little suspicious, see, and he was about ready to call the police until the two boys came. And then he says, well, hello, Sonny, he said, how are you, and, you know, and then the boys now heard the voice, and they said, holy gee, Humphrey Bogart, you see. Now, everything was all right. The father believed him now, because they didn't think, why Humphrey Bogart come here, knock at the door, back door especially, to ask for a cup of coffee. And that's why when I started work, I could see the Thompson family there, you see, because they could ride home now, and said that Humphrey Bogart came over and had coffee with us. And but I thought it was quite an interesting story. And that's Humphrey. He's just, you know, easygoing. I think he was just a wonderful actor.
Often late on the set.
No, he was always on time. I never had seen him late, and I never hear him with any great arguments, you know. He would just do his work. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
He likes his drinks. It was a lot of fun. And we used to have a lot of fun down in the steam baths. He and Peter Lorre, they just played tricks on each other. As a matter of fact, I have a picture where we three of us together with this steam coming up somehow. But in this bath, really there weren't any steam. It's very dry. You pull a string and water would drop on some hot rocks and evaporate, but you feel this heat. But Bogey had some artists airbrush and made some steam come up. Peter Lorre, Humphrey, myself, 3 close-ups.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a bit about some of the westerns you've done, and particularly interested in the 2 or 3 silent ones, the Alaskan, the Rough Riders, and what are your memories of shooting the Alaskan with
Thomas Meehan?
And Estelle Taylor in Canada?
Thomas Meehan, Estelle Taylor. That was a film that was made for the Lasky Studios, directed by Herbert Brennan. We went up to Canada to shoot the exteriors. I remember in that particular film, I think, what year was that? 1925, I think it was.
Mid-20s.
Yeah, mid-20s.
24.
24.
Yeah.
Well, panchromatic film was not used very much. Wasn't used. We always used what we call the orthochromatic film, stock. And orthochromatic was sensitive to blues, not to the red side. Now, panchromatic film that came out, and panchromatic is sensitive to all the whole spectrum, but you had to use filters. So I've been using orthochromatic film, shooting all the interiors, and we had this Royal Mounted Police with the red coats. Well, with orthochromatic, the red went dark, and they would have dark coats on. It's black and white. So we shot this scene now and showing them to get up, ready to leave the door. Now we go up to Canada and we continue the scene where they come out and get on their horses and ride off with this mountain background. And we had many other scenes also. So it was just beautiful up in Banff, Canada, Charles, around Lake Louise and Banff. And these wonderful mountains that just covered with snow and the blue sky and the clouds. And so I was tempted to use panchromatic film, and by putting on a light red filter, it would make the sky go dark and bring the mountains and the snow and the clouds, and it would be beautiful. So I did. and they're ready for the scene. So the scene was now the continuation, where they come out of the little cabin and get on the horses. Now I had changed to panchromatic film and shot the scene. We sent it back to the laboratory. About 4 days later, we get a telegram. It says, "Why did you change the uniforms of the mounted police? Now you put white coats on them, light coats. And here in the studio, you had the dark red." Suddenly, they didn't know what happened. When I put the red filter on, it changed the red, you see, Charles, and made the red coats turn very light.
Yes.
Not completely white, but very light. And so here we seen them before, and they had dark coat, and they come out of the door and they got light coats. But they thought they blamed onto the costume man. But they didn't realize what I had done, and no one knew to this day. So they said, well, they blamed it on maybe the film stock or something wrong. So we remade it. But I knew what happened, and I had to go back to the orthochromatic film, you see, to match up.
But panchromatic did later on photograph.
Oh yes,
Reds.
red.
It's dark.
You could if you didn't use a filter, the red came out very nice, but it wasn't completely black, you see. But you could use panchromatic and do many things with it.
You had good conditions for shooting?
In Canada, yes. It was beautiful up there shooting, and I remember because Estelle Taylor at that time was in love with Jack Dempsey, and I remember he came up, and it was wonderful, to get to meet the great Jack Dempsey, the champion,
Was Thomas Mahan pleasant to work with?
Thomas Mahan, yes, very nice to work with. I had worked with him before, only I was an assistant on the DeMille pictures. But now I was a cameraman, and Brennan was the one that was interesting to work with.
The director?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, he was an actor before, I think, and he directed on the stage, and he used to act out all the scenes for the for the players. You see, walk through them,
Both male and female?
Yes. I had made another film with Mr. Brennan, because A Woman with Four Faces, with Richard Dix and Betty Compson. I think Richard Dix was in jail, and Betty Compson was supposed to make up like an elderly woman, like Richard Dix's mother, to go and visit him in jail and to tell him, son, always look up above for help, my son. You see, as a preparation for an escape, because there would be a airplane, dive over to the prison yard where they're playing baseball on a Sunday, and Richard Dix would be in the audience, and he would run out and grab this rope ladder and hang on, and they would pull him out of the prison. It's really impossible, to hang on to the rope and grab out, but that's what it was. So I went back to the studio one night late to do some. I always worked around with the darkroom, made still pictures, and I would develop them, you see. And as I went into the studio gate, I looked down the stage. There I see this old woman with a shawl around and a cane. And I said to the gate man, I said, "Who's that down there?" Oh, he said, "I don't know." He said, "That old director. He's down there, been walking around there. He's mumbling, rehearsing, I guess." So I walked down. There was Herbert Brennan, made up like an old woman with his shawl, with the glasses, with a cane, and he just kept looking up. He says, "Remember now, my son, always look up for help. And here he was walking around the stages, rehearsing himself, you see.
Wonderful story.
But do you know, Charles, in this picture, a woman with four faces, I had to photograph this plane diving down this prison yard on Sunday. So we went to San Francisco, the San Quentin prison it was. And we had permission. So I mounted the camera on the airplane and we flew over. And we made the dive 2-3 times. And I noticed the guards pointing their rifles at us. But you know what had happened? They had sent the permit over to the prison officials by car, and we flew over and we got there before the permit. And they were shooting at us.
Incredible.
I didn't know it until we got home. They shook hands. They're glad we got back.
The Rough Riders was shot in and around San Antonio, wasn't it? In Texas.
That was shot in San Antonio.
Yes, with
Victor Fleming
directed. Took on with the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
And
we had Charlie Farrell.
Nick?
It's very interesting. I always enjoyed working with Victor Fleming, and we were very good friends together.
It was about the Rough Riders,
Teddy Roosevelt. We had one scene where they were to take a lot of wild horses and to break them for saddle. So they found a place out in the fairgrounds, and they advertised in the papers. They wanted cowboys, riders, to break wild horses. And everybody, naturally, they thought they could ride a wild horse. They applied for the job. Can you imagine? 400 untamed horses, never been ridden before, and they saddle them and they turn them loose all at one time. Well, I never seen so many fellows tossed into the air, Charles. These fellows, they weren't really good riders. They just thought they wanted to get in the movies, you see. I think there were about 40 or 50 of them taken to the first aid camp. And it was dusty. The horse, the minute they start bucking, and they kicked up so much dust, and all I could see was people, fellas going up through the dust in the air. It was a great scene. I remember Charlie Farrell was in the picture. George Bancroft, another actor, Noah Barry. It was hot in San Antonio. Well, Victor Fleming, you know, he was quite a guy. He's, I think, a quarter-blood Indian, big 6'2", 3", good-looking fellow, you know, big hands. And I used to look through my Bell and Howell camera, and I had to look down through the prism to focus and line up my shots. And he used to say, "Oh, you look through enough," and he hit me back in the neck. And his big hands, you know, he made me dizzy. But I said, "Oh, now cut it out, Vic." And he always did that. Every day he'd hit me back in the neck. So I said, "Well, how am I going to keep this fellow from hitting me?" So I thought I got a bright idea. Well, I took a little piece of cotton adhesive tape and I used to stick it back on my neck. See? So when he looked down, he thought I had a boil. So he wouldn't hit me. Oh, this was wonderful. So every day I had to put that little piece of adhesive tape in cotton. This went on for a couple of weeks. And I guess he's getting to think, well, gee, it should be well, whatever happened with him. So one day, through this heat up in San Antonio, the tape came loose and it flipped over. And he saw that I was fooling him, you see. Well, he hit me, and I tell you, he knocked me out. He was a sadistic kind of a guy, see. Well, before he came into the movies, he was a taxi cab driver down on Spring Street, and he used to tell me what they used to do. that they used to, the streetcar motormen, they used to try to run the taxi cabs over, you see, and they tried to beat each other. They didn't have any signals in those days. So he said, you know what we'd do, Jimmy? He said, we'll wait till it rain, real rain hard. And when the streetcar would stop on the corner, we'd take our cab and run over their what they call that front part, cowcatcher they call it. Or anyway, that
Yes.
It was something they put in front of the car to go along, and they would bend it down.
Fender.
And they would run over it and bend it. And then the motorman and the conductor have to get out in this rain, get soaking wet, trying to straighten this so the car could go, you see. It was I remember on that picture we had to have a balloon to go up, observation balloon. That was during the Spanish-American War. They went to Cuba, to San Juan Hill. You see, they charged up.
Yes.
And they had this gas-filled balloon, you know, out in San Antonio. And he said, Jimmy, you want to take a ride? And I said, sure. He said, take your camera up there and system, get a shot, you know. I said, fine. So we put the camera in this basket, and they let this thing up there. And we got some shots, you know. Then I said, Vic, take us down. I must have been up about 150 feet or so. And here he was. We had a rope fastened onto this basket. And Vic Fleming, I would see down there swinging this rope. You know what he was trying to do? He was trying to get it loose up there. You see? Now, the only one that knew how to run this balloon was the man that owned the balloon. He had a son, about 12 years old. Now, he went up with us. And he's swinging. And I asked the kid, I said, what happens if the balloon get loose? He said, well, I think my dad always says he pulled this string and let some of the gas out. Or, you know. Because I said, what are these sandbags here for? He said, well, if we want to go up higher, we throw them out. You see, here was this Vic Fleming trying to shake this rope loose. He's crazy.
Vicious man.
Huh?
Vicious.
Oh. Another time we were making a film with Richard Dix, a Zane Grey story. We were riding along the trail, about 1,500 feet up, and suddenly he rode in front and he waved his hand. He said, stop everybody, get off, there's a rattlesnake up here in front. And he got off and went down there, and there was a rattlesnake. He got a stick and he got a hold of the rattlesnake's neck and picked it up and looked at it and finally threw it down. And he always carried a little .22 target pistol and a hatchet, because he used to chop his way through the woods to get camera set up, you see. So he said, now fellas, he said, I want to show you what a good shot I am. He said, without looking at this snake, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to shoot the snake, hit him right through the head. So we stood there, go ahead, go ahead. So he did. He pointed his gun out and pointed and moved it. And he pulled the trigger and he hit the snake right through the head. So my assistant, his name was Archie Stout, he was there. He was smoking a cigarette. He said, Art, you're such a good shot. He said, let me see you shoot the cigarette out of my hand. He said, hold it up. He stood about 8 feet away, and he aimed, and he shot. You know what? He shot him right through the finger.
Oh.
See? Vic Fleming, he was, well, he had kidney stones. And one day up in the mountains, and I hear this groaning. And I went over and see, it was Vic Fleming. And he was lying, and we were sleeping in tents. And he'd fallen out of the bed, and he was laying in this mud. It was raining. There's Vic. And he was so big, I couldn't pick him up, put him on the cot. And he says, Jimmy, he says, there's some tablets over there. He said, get some. He says, give me some water, and just give me some tablet. So I said, can I do anything for you? He said, no, you can't. He said, I'm passing kidney stone. So he said, I'll be all right. finally he got back to bed, and these tablets, I guess, to ease his pain. But next day he showed me these stones he'd passed, the biggest peas, you see. But then he was sick for a while. I went over to visit him in his house. He lived down here, not far from the studio, those early days. And he's lying in bed there. And you know what he had crawling all over him, playing? A Gila monster. Yeah, they look like a little small alligator, you know. They crawl and they look like beads. And here he got this Gila monster. He found it in the desert someplace. He took it home and he said it was his pet. And they're very poisonous. But here he was lying down playing with this Gila monster. Charles, let's stop a moment.